Well, hi, this is Alison Arngrim, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Yes, you are. I had you on the other day. I was in LA and I was interviewing your friend Steve Peters, and I just can't get enough of him.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've known him since '86. He performed the wedding, my husband and I, Bob. He married us. I mean, and you know, when he married us, he said, I have this whole selection of Bibles I could use in your ceremony. I have my grandfather's Bible. I have this love it. And we're like, we want the white leatherette autographed by Tammy Faye Bible. You know that's the one we want. We want the one
Yes.
Tammy Faye gave you that is white leatherette and autographed by Tammy Faye, because that's just like, who has? He's like, yeah, that's of course you do. And now, of course, it's all like Tammy Faye, it's all exploded, and I could not be happier. I'm just so
Yeah.
thrilled for him. This is great.
He said that you did a lot of favors for him during the pandemic because he's immune compromised because of his history
Right?
of health and everything. And he said you were just an absolute angel. And I want everybody to know that about you because, look, we know you're not Nellie Oleson, right? We know we get that.
We would hope. We would hope.
But you're so much better. I mean, it's so much better. You've known this man for decades now. And
Yeah.
throughout the pandemic, you ensured as much as you could that he was able to stay healthy.
Yeah, well, and we all, well, I say we all, me, my husband, Steve, our friends, people we hang out with, really supported each other when everything was locked down and there wasn't always food in on the shelves of the stores, let alone my friends who are immune compromised who couldn't go to the store. And then I got the friends with like asthma and 10,000 other things. So Bob and I were on the phone going, do you need anything? Are you okay? Are you okay? You know, checking with people, for God's sakes. So I was driving around dropping off food, and toilet paper and Lysol for people. But Steve was like, I don't have a washing machine in my apartment. I go to the laundromat. The laundromat's closed, and I'm not going to go sit in there anyway with my immune system. I was like, this is a thing I hadn't thought of. And I went, well, I have a giant, like, suburban housewife washer and dryer that I'm coming over. And next thing I know, I'm doing this dude's laundry like every week. It was hysterical. So, yeah, now we've been able to hook him up with a fluff and fold. And of course, because I went out of town, I said, we got to find somebody else. But I did his laundry for a year. So I was like, well, gotta do something. He can't go out. So yeah, we help people, but that's always been Steve's nature and my nature and my husband's nature. And that's like, I mean, that's how Steve Peters and I met, because I was volunteering at AIDS Project Los Angeles. Because Steve Tracy, who played Percival on Little House on the Prairie, had gone public with his AIDS diagnosis back in '86. And so I started volunteering there. And that's always just sort of been my nature of like, oh dear, we're having an emergency. What do we do? I mean, when there was an earthquake, Bob and I went out after to see if people were stuck in their apartments or homes. We went and grabbed gloves and crowbars and went out and see if anybody needed to be dug out. That's what you do. And
Right.
so that's the kind of thing that somebody's in that kind of distress. Well, I guess I could do your laundry. That doesn't seem like a big thing, but he was like, yeah, it was kind of a big deal at the time. So
Yeah, it is a big deal. And you don't have to do it. And that's what makes it a big deal, is that you go out of your way to do something. As look, nobody wants to do laundry, but you do it. It's funny, your
doing
kids.
laundry anyway. It's like, okay, so I throw in one more load. I said, I'm
Yeah.
not ironing. I'm not ironing. Okay, we're
No
drawing the
iron.
line at ironing.
Right. Yeah. Fluff, fold, no iron. I got
That's it. That's it. I'm
that's
not
fine.
matching up the socks. I wash it. I dry it. It goes back in the bag. That's what you get.
Since before you met Steve, he has been HIV positive, and yet he is still alive. This must have shocked the heck out of you, because he was diagnosed in the early 80s.
83. Yeah, 83. He was sick as a dog. Well, he's been sick. I mean, that's the thing, is that in the early 80s, when I started volunteering at AIDS Project Los Angeles, 86, which is where I met my husband, Bob, who'd started there running the hotline in 84, people back then were given 9 weeks, and then it was 9 months to live. People didn't live a year once they were diagnosed, because it wasn't like, oh, you were positive. What test? You were diagnosed with
Right.
full-blown AIDS. And so they said, well, you got a couple of months, because it didn't have anything for you. There was nothing. There wasn't even AZT back then. So people they just died. And once in a while, someone would be a, quote, long-term survivor, which meant they lived like 2 years.
Right.
And then they
Right.
started having meds. Like we thought Steve Tracy did so well, Steve from Little House, like, because he lived like 2.5 years or more. But people just died. And Steve Peters did get sick. He got very sick. He almost died several times. And in the last 10, 11 years, he had a back thing and a kidney thing. He got really sick. He almost died a couple more times just for good measure, because I guess he hadn't in a while. But his doctors are sort of baffled too. They're like, yeah, we're not sure quite what happened. You were given a lot of different medications. We tried a lot of experimental stuff. Something went crazy. As his doctor said, if I really knew which of the 8 million things I tried on you worked, I would publish and say, oh my God, I cured AIDS. But I don't know. I don't know what happened, but you're not dead.
Yeah. Well, so enough about Steve. I wanted to open with that because he's such a remarkable guy. And then here's the episode. I put that link down for everybody below. You guys really should check it out. It's a remarkable story, and he's got some stuff coming out.
I'm interviewing him on because I have a show, the Alison Arngrim Show, and I'm interviewing him tonight.
Nice.
Well, because I'm heading out to France, but yeah, because all right, that's the whole thing. When this whole thing blew up with Eyes of Tammy Faye, the movie, I was like, dude, these people, I'm sure they think you're dead. You should really contact them and let them know you're alive. And of course, they're like, oh my God, he's alive. So
I don't know. People who are younger don't get how impossible it is that Steve is alive.
Right, yeah.
It's just because it's insane. I mean, like you said, you got diagnosed, you got sick, you got diagnosed, you died, and that was it. There was no way around it. Right.
There was nothing. So it's a whole other world now. But yeah, so I said, I know they're watching that old interview with you and they're making this movie and they're going, what a shame, that nice man. I said, I guarantee you they're going to fall over if you call them up and let them know you're alive. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are you working on? You got some projects that are going on.
Everything. I'm alive. I tell you, I'm doing stuff. So I do everything. We've been doing stand up for years, and over the last couple decades, I had a whole one-woman show called Confessions of a Prairie Bitch, hence the title of the book. Right. And I just got back from New York, which is a big deal because when the pandemic hit, and obviously everything was canceled, all of my out-of-town gigs, which is kind of what I do for life, go out of town and tell stories to make people laugh. That was it. I was in the house and I was like, what am I going to do? And then I started doing online shows. I actually started this marvelous platform, stageit.com. And the people who had booked me into New York said, well, we have a thing with StageIt. Some of our drag queens are doing it. So I wound up doing Confessions online. We had Nasty Nellie's Scary Prairie for Halloween. We did theme shows. We did everything. But once a month, we'd set up the computer in the backdrop. I got a backdrop of Hawaii here. We had a summer show. Turned the living room into a studio, set it up, and I would come out and do a stand-up set and try to create special effects and ridiculous things in the living room, very primitive. And people loved it. They were able to log on and pay a couple of dollars, much less than to see normally a live show, and be live in their living room. So it was great because it meant I was still doing something. And then my fans were like, oh my God, I can't see your show. Oh, well, now I can. And then I started reading the Little House books live on Facebook. And that was I was sitting on the living room floor saying, what am I going to do? And my husband, Bob, said, oh, you'll think of something. You always think of something. And I was like, oh, you're right. And then I said, well, I should go back and reread the Little House books. See how the character develops just for me, just for my own edification. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, everybody else is bored. I'll go on Facebook. So next thing I know, I'm on Facebook in a bonnet going, once upon a time, reading the Little House book. People went crazy. I had like 50,000 hits. I was like, what? So I got a plaque from Sacramento from a senator. It was craziness. So that I'm still doing it. Like after this, I'm going to go on. I'm reading Little Town on the Prairie. So I have another chapter to do. So I started doing it. It was such a hit. And then they said, how about cooking videos? So I have a cooking thing I've been doing called Who's Going to Do the Cooking?
Nice.
No, Nellie couldn't cook, and that was the big line. Who's going to do the cooking? So I have been showing people how to make scrambled eggs. And then I have an online store. So people said, well, I want to buy a bonnet. And I said, well, okay, I can sell you. I have bonnets. I can sell you a bonnet. And that turned into a whole insane thing. So I wound up creating this whole other world during the pandemic in my living room where I had readings and cooking shows and a stand-up show and all these things. In the midst of this, I made a movie. Nobody was working. Everything was shut down. They gradually started opening up, doing COVID protocols. And I got a call to go to Utah and be in a movie. I knew this woman and she had made this film and she'd said, I'm going to make a sequel, blah, blah, blah. I'll have you in it. Oh, sure. Yeah, great. Yeah, la, 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 la. Hi, I got the funding. I'm making the sequel and you're in it. Wait, what? That people say that all the time. They always say, oh, yes, I'm going to put you in my next film. And then you never hear from them again. Right. And she's like, no, we're doing it. And I said, wait, it's the middle of a pandemic. And she said, yeah, everything I've ever done was impossible. So I figured, sure, why not this too? Because she's this young woman who was trying to make this movie from when she was in her teens. And had to jump through all these hoops in Hollywood, and it's a whole story of how she made the movie as a movie, for God's sakes. And she finally made this movie and stuck to her guns and made it. It is really good. And so then she's making the sequel. And next thing I know, I'm on a plane, like completely by myself in this whole section. And then we did the whole COVID protocols. We had testing and temperature checks, and we ate lunch outside. You name it, we did it. We were so sanitized on that set. But we made a movie. And then on top of crazy things, she gets it's a little independent film. She gets theatrical release. And it's called Even in Dreams, and it's in theaters. I went to a premiere. It's in the theater. I'm stunned as anyone else.
Yeah. Well, good. I mean, look, I always say this for folks who don't know, every movie is an impossible adventure.
Exactly.
And they all start with the conversation of, would you be interested if we can get the money? And you're like, yeah, of course, because, whatever.
Right. If you can get the money. Ha, 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 ha. Yeah, because that's right. If I had 10 cents for everyone who said, I'm making a movie, if I get the money, you're in it, I would have millions of dollars and have been in 57 films. So yeah, no. So I always go, well, sure. And so I was floored when this thing actually happened, and it's pretty darn good.
Well, yeah. So, and I want to get back to the movie, but let's back up, because look, obviously we got to play the hits here a little bit.
Yeah, right.
You were Nellie in Little House on the Prairie. I went bananas again for all of the Little House books this past winter, and I probably will read more because I didn't finish them all.
Did.
And I was shocked because I read them as a kid. I watched the show. Right. They used to have this program, and no one else remembers this but me, but they used to have a program where they would give you the script for the show coming up as a kid in elementary school, and you would read through it in class, like a reading program. And they did the Waltons, all the shows from back then, Little House on the Prairie and Chips, all of those shows from that era.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, super clever. And no one else remembers it. And I'm like, how can you guys not remember? Like,
I don't think everyone got that. That was a special program because they didn't. What year was that? Because they didn't do it everywhere. I think you were very lucky.
It was elementary school, so it was going to be like the late 70s.
Because it wouldn't have been like first run. It would have been like maybe reruns. They did. Yeah.
No, not reruns. No, it was first run. I don't know how they pulled it off.
I don't know who got hold of those scripts because her. But that's awesome that somebody did that.
Yeah, and so we had these. Boy in the Bubble was one of them. We read ahead Boy in the Bubble. Right?
Fantastic.
And so you had a chance to, like, as it was coming on that week, read it. Anyhow, so it's one thing to watch a show and love it, and it's part of American history and Americana and everything else, but then to actually read it out loud in class, it was really, really, really special to do that. I know you must have had a great time with it. Did you read the books back then in that era as a kid, or?
No, see, that's what's crazy. And so many people from the show have the same story. I never read the books. I had no idea what the heck they were talking about. I went on this audition. My favorite is Charlotte Stewart, who is Miss Beadle on the show, talks about she'd never read the books, didn't know what the heck they were talking about. She also didn't realize she was reading for a series. She went, maybe it's recurring, because she'd played a lot of school marms on like Bonanza and Gunsmoke.
Mm-hmm.
She said, another school marm part. Oh, well. And she's like, oh, great. And then just like they wanted her, and she's like, well, wait, what? And the agent's calling, go, no, it's like a 4-year contract. She's like, oh my God, what have I gotten? This is great. What have I got myself into? She's like, I better get the books. And she said I was at a garage sale, and there was one. She didn't realize there were 9 books. So she picks up the book, and it's like one of the really sad ones. It's like The Long Winter. She said, I pick it up and I start reading, and in the first few pages, the dog dies and Mary goes blind. And she's like, this is terrible. What am I doing? So yeah, people didn't. I had no clue. I got the show, and then I was like, well, I could read the books. It was like a real person. This Nellie person lived, and Laura's real, and she wrote these books, and obviously Nellie was someone she knew, and this is all. So ran out, got the books, and I saw that Town Party Country Party was the big story. We did an episode. We did an episode called Country Girls, an episode called Town Party Country Party, which are actual chapters in the one on the banks of Plum Creek, and really. Right. The books that cover Laura's entire life. The show is really focused on banks of Plum Creek, that chapter, because in Walnut, because you have a town, you have a doctor and a teacher and other people to make a story around, which makes sense. That when you read the books and you say, I'm going to make a series, which one? Am I going to pick the one where they're all by themselves alone in a cabin? Or am I going to pick the one where they're living in town? There's neighbors. Yeah. So I'm reading it, and there's drawings. I look like the drawing. And I'm sort of blown away going, okay, this is kind of spooky and weird, this connection to that. So wonderfully weird. And over the years, I've now found out like the real Nellie was named Nellie Owens, and she's buried in Forest Grove, Oregon, where I have been to the cemetery. And There were three girls in Laura's life that were awful to her, and she combined them. It's Stella Gilbert and Genevieve Masters and Nellie Owens, and she sort of made a blend because she didn't really hang out with Nellie as a teenager. So she went, well, I'll just, yeah, make this all one person.
Yeah, that when you
but we were clueless during the show. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're reading the books as an adult, and you start to realize it is this whole decades long kind of journey that she goes through. Did you enjoy the books, or were they kids' books to you?
No, because in fact, I was sort of startled, especially when reading them as a teenager, because I was like 12, I was like, oh, okay, why did I not read these? These are really good. Somehow I did not get these as a kid. I don't know. I got a different set of books. And then now as an adult, I'm sort of surprised that they even were okay for kids. Like Little House in the Big Woods makes sense for kids. They're in the woods and somebody makes a pie. it's like children's book. And then it starts getting weird because as she gets older, she starts writing it almost from that perspective. In the teen book, it's very much a teenager. She's talking about falling in love with Almanzo and getting married, and they're talking about the town starving in the winter. And I'm like, this isn't for 9-year-old girls. What the heck is this? And it gets weird too because they move on to land in Kansas because Charles Ingalls, great character on the show. Laura loved him in the books. Terrible businessman, terrible farmer, really didn't know what he was doing. Kind of bad at stuff in reality. And when you get like Pioneer Girl, Laura's real autobiography, you go, wow, Charles Ingalls was terrible at this. And it's a wonder they didn't all starve because they nearly did several times. As soon as they stop, as soon as they get to the town in South Dakota, a little town on the prairie, and just stop traveling, stop trying to have a big old farm. And he has like a shop in town. They're fine. Like they can afford to send Mary to school and they can afford a piano and all this. Suddenly they're like, oh, so apparently you were terrible at the whole farming thing. He didn't know what the heck he was doing. So they go to Kansas and he says, oh yeah, this is fine. And they keep in the book. She even makes it obvious that she knows better as an adult. Ma and people keep asking him, now you're sure you checked that this isn't the part of the land they gave to the Indians, right? Like this is the side of the border the government. And he's like, yeah, well, I didn't really check, but this guy in town said it was fine. She's like, you sure? Did you bring the paper with you? I lost the map. So clearly Charles has no idea what he's doing, and he's completely built the house. I don't know why all the Indians keep riding their horses right past our door, because you're like in their driveway. You built your house in these people's driveway, you idiot, because you didn't look at the map. So the Native American white settler thing gets really heated up. And people don't realize Laura Ingalls addresses this. People say, well, Laura Ingalls said bad things about Indians. No, she didn't. Laura Ingalls' mother says a bunch of terrible things and like hates Native Americans. And she's like, the Indians, she's terrified. And it's the dead end, only good Indians, a dead Indian in the whole bit. So Laura's mother says all this stuff. And Charles, the characters, because it's very fictionalized, the characters of Charles and Laura keep saying, no, stop saying that. The Native Americans are our friends, and what's your problem? So it's addressed. And the reality is, Little House on the Prairie, the part where they're in Kansas, Laura Ingalls was like 3-4 years old. So she didn't really have that conversation. She purposely inserted these conversations into the books to play out the issues with the Native Americans and the land, and the fact that then, of course, they do get caught, and the cavalry shows up and says, you gotta leave. The soldiers, the feds come and go, yeah, you're going to leave. You're moving. And it's all a disaster, and Charles has blown it again. But Laura, as an adult in writing the books, really lays it out that this was a giant problem. And the fact that the books came out in the 30s, which was not exactly like, oh, we all love Native Americans now era. People were pretty harsh then. And she's got all this very pro-Native American land rights stuff going on in her book. It's like, oh, hello. So as an adult, you read it and you go, wow, this is so not for 9-year-olds. What is happening? This is for grown-ups. She's talking about these issues. And then, of course, it gets very weird because it's post-Civil War, but their entire relationship with African Americans and thing is just like, well, what? There's a minstrel show. And yet there's a black doctor, Dr. Tan, who saves their lives. So that's all like mixed messages, because in the 1930s, when she was writing them, she did not know how to deal with this stuff yet. And of course, in the 1800s, so they are controversial. They do talk about really uncomfortable things. And like I said, there's death and starvation and mayhem, and people die and terrible things happen on the show. The show sort of allowed Michael and the writers to take these issues and really play them out, because now it was the 1970s and we could talk about stuff.
Right.
So we've got that episode, The Wisdom of Solomon, with Todd Bridges playing a young black child, talking about slavery, talking about, and he says to Paul Ingalls, if you had the choice to live to be 50 years old as a white man or live to be 100 as a black man, which would you take?
Yeah.
And Paul's like, and racism is explored, the stuff with the Indians is explored, everything from spousal abuse to child abuse to alcoholism, drug abuse. We got people ODing on morphine, and all of that does get played out in the show, which is interesting because Laura tried to start talking about those issues in the 30s in the books way more than people normally were, and then we like blew it all out in the 70s and made it very modern on the show. So it's kind of a fascinating process. And then, like I said, you go and get Pioneer Girl, which is the original like autobiography Laura was going to write that didn't sell, and she did the children's books instead. And you go, oh, that happened. I did well, and it's a whole other world. So yeah.
One of the things I was fascinated by that whole era is just how hard it was to survive. Okay, you know, Charles Ingalls has this rambling bone, wants to go to Oregon. Nellie ends up dying in Oregon ultimately. People moved around because calamity did happen. You know, crops.
I don't think people could get through the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and the wind sickness, you know, there's a whole thing talk about people on the prairie going nuts because of the wind. When you think of all that, the wild prairie grass growing 6 feet high and stuff's uncut, and the winds that come across the flatlands, the howling that it made through that, and there's no TV or radio to turn on to drown out the sound. There's no noise canceling headphones. Yeah, and you're in a little tiny head. The walls don't block out any sound. You don't even glass in the window. It was deafening. And they talk about people would get, quote, wind sickness. They would actually go mad and hurt themselves. And it's really, really, and I don't know how, it's awful. And when, you know, you read The Long Winter, they're twisting up hay to make these little bundles of hay that are thick enough so that they're sort of like little fireplace starter things, so that because they have no wood and they're going to all freeze to death.
Yeah, or no flour or whatever. Like they're always on the edge of a calamity. The other thing too that we lose track of when we're critical, I hate when we dig up people from another time and chastise them. Like she's been dead for 60 years. You know, it's time to let that be. But we look at her, but you don't realize the context of the time. Wyatt Earp and her were about 10 years apart in age.
Right.
We don't frame that in our mind that way. You know, Geronimo was a couple decades older, but he was an active person, and there were atrocities in all directions. So you might come to a town, it's like, oh, did you hear last year about the atrocity that the Indians that killed that poor settler family? And then the next year it's the other direction, and then it's the army, and then there was a lot of that too. Violent place.
There was a thing that was cut that Laura talked about, that apparently Pa's plowing the field and they're finding bones of people. And Laura's like, what are these, Pa? Why are we finding human skulls? Well, you know, and he explained the war between some are Indians and some are white settlers, and the Indians killed the settlers killed the Indians, and vice versa endlessly. And these are people's bodies. And they went, yeah, we're cutting that. This is going to be for 9-year-old girls. That's coming out of the book. But as I said, if Laura was just awful, if Laura had written in her books, yes, Indians are terrible and I hate them, and it's true, and they should have she didn't. House on the Prairie plainly shows that Charles was a schmuck and should not have done this. Plainly, they argue with Ma every time she says in bad, they go, no, you're wrong. It's like, and she went out of her way, leapt over hurdles and put things in a book in the 30s, saying that white people were treating Indians really badly.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like,
context of
that's
the time
not
matters.
striking me as someone who hates Indians.
Yeah, the context matters, right? And just like when, if you were to write a Laura Ingalls kind of book now about someone who grew up in the 70s and 80s, you know, they would have gone through a dramatic difference in terms of what was socially acceptable, you know, to compare it to now.
And that's the thing, it's not that she was bucking the trend then, because remember like how TV shows sort of like late 60s, early 70s started doing episodes about Native Americans, but people were not writing books in 1935 and 1936 saying we treated the Native Americans badly and stole their land and we suck. People weren't doing that, and Laura did.
Yeah.
She was like pro Native American rights. She was like the complete opposite of like what people like going, yeah, okay, did you read this book? So it's kind of shocking. But it is weird. And then women's roles are sort of like almost you burst out laughing. The things that, well, a lady must this and lady. And Laura keeps bucking that trend too. As a kid, she's terribly tomboyish and she keeps working with her dad. They don't have a son. The oldest girl is blind and isn't into working in film. Laura's out hammering shingles on the roof with Pa, and she's out baling hay. And even the mother's going, whoa, 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 why are you having, she's getting a little too old for this stuff. She's like a young lady. And he's like, well, who do we have? And she's willing to do it. So, but yeah. And she's like, don't let anybody see you. She's doing all this man's work. And at one point she said something about my daughters won't work in the fields. Her mother said, only foreigners do. And Mom! It was like, yeah, the person in the books who does get in trouble is the mother. The mother said, Caroline said terrible, terrible things about just everybody. It's just like, wow. But Laura did a bunch of things that absolutely were supposed to be males only stuff. And she kept working and things. And the reality is they worked because they had to. She even plays up her mother being more upset about her working than she really was, like in Little Town on the Prairie, working in town. She can't work in town. Well, in real life, they moved to a hotel and Laura was like making beds and cleaning rooms at 9. But hey, so it's like she tries to like make her mother more of it. But she worked and she did things that meant. And in real life, Carrie Ingalls grew up and became a typesetter for newspapers and went to South Dakota and then wound up marrying this guy who was involved in the creation of Mount Rushmore. And it's all these wild stories, but they were all terrible. The women were all very independent and worked. Even Mary, as went to a top school for the blind and became extremely independent and learned how to do all sorts of things. So that's sort of a shocking tale in and of itself that she did do things that the ladies weren't supposed to do. Big point in the Happy Golden Years when she and Almanza get married. They're on the way, and Almanza reassures her, says, I already talked to the Reverend. He's not going to use the word obey in the wedding ceremony. He doesn't believe in it either. Laura, people still in the 50s were saying it, in the 1800s, she did not say obey, and the Reverend apparently was a, quote, free thinker and said, no, you shouldn't be saying obey in the wedding ceremony. He was all for it. That was shocking when she wrote it in the 30s.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's as an adult you read these books and you go, whoa, well, hey, what is happening? Yeah. It's quite the surprise.
The other thing too, Almanzo gets sick and is for the bulk of his life, I will say the word crippled. He is not full capacity, so she was going to have, he had a stroke, and so he's not going to be able to do the full farmer load. So who's gonna this? It's like she was born for this, It's like you had to make do with what you had, and.
Their place in Missouri, he tried to do stuff. He had an apple horse, but it was really obvious. No, he couldn't do any of the stuff he wanted to do. He had his one arm didn't work anymore.
Right. The other thing also about when we look at this whole time is that she wrote these stories down or kept them in her head, and so many times like people don't ever write the stories, so we have her record. She's not exceptional, and she's actually exceptional because it's so normal, like you live
this happened to like millions of people during this time period. Now, of course, the funky thing is everybody goes, I want to live like that. No. It was awful. But the other thing is the Ingalls were really poor, and as I said, there was some questionable decision making on Charles's part of the moving and where they moved to. But they were poor because as you read the books too, you start to go, wait a minute, the neighbors aren't starving. It's like things are a little off. And like when the aunt, the relatives, all the brothers and sisters of Caroline and of Charles, when Aunt Dosha comes, says, hey, come to South Dakota, it's all settled. My husband's got a job. You're like, well, they're fine. They're not living in one room and starve. They seem quite okay. It's clearly, yes, there were locusts and terrible things down here, but gee, these brothers and sisters, her aunts and uncles all seem properly dressed and well fed. What's going on at the Ingalls house? That's not quite making it. And you realize, when you read like the historical text by Girl, the Ingalls had a bad time of it. They were not lucky. They were very unlucky. And Charles made some really rash decisions that were not financially sound, because once they settle in De Smet, like things really pick up. And then eventually he was the town justice of the peace. He was practically mayor, and he had a store, and everything was great. But when he was sure we're going to live off the land, it just, he like crashed and burned like several times.
And to her credit, Caroline's the one that's like, stop. That's it. We're not moving.
Doing this. This is bad.
You already had us live in the side of a river, a hole.
We're living in a hole in the ground. This is not a good idea. And a cow falls through the roof. And yeah, it's like, why? Why would you want to do this to yourself?
Part of that Laura Ingalls legend too, because she kept doing this. Her and her friend and her daughter drove across country in an open car. Like, and I mean, like when there weren't even roads sometimes up, and it's remarkable. And you're like, wait, this is some old lady driving around the States.
And when she and Almanza went to Missouri, we're starting to move into almost modern era, and they were taking the wagon. And on the way, they were running into people who had wagons, but they were also running into people who were moving by car because time actually had moved on. And they were like, why don't you have a car? Yeah. And then eventually, it was a big discussion. And then that's the other thing that freaks people out, because they think of Laura as a child in the 1800s. And it's like, she lived to the 50s. There was radio and TV and cars, and she had a car, and she went to the movies. And I remember, what was that? She didn't like Charlie Chaplin. She went and saw Charlie, and she thought he was terrible.
Yeah. One of the things too, when I think about history and time and everything, Laura Ingalls dies in, I think, 57, which is about 5 years before you're born. I mean, your lives almost overlap. And how remarkable is that?
It's wonderfully weird. Robin and Rachel, the Greenbush twins who played baby Carrie, share a birthday with Carrie Ingalls. Born the same day.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. All wonderfully wacky and spooky and big. Yeah, we all really did. And that's the thing. When the show started, we hadn't read the books. Hardly anyone had read the books. And then we gradually went, hey, this is really interesting, and started to pick up more and more. We'd meet people who were distant relations of the Ingalls. And then after the show, things are like saying, I know I'm learning all this stuff about Nellie. I'm going to her grave. And now I keep going to all the Little House sites, and I've read, and I'm friends with Bill Anderson. If you ever get a chance to talk to him, you should have him on. William Anderson wrote extensively about Laura. He didn't set out to be the Laura guy. He's written about a bunch of people. He's written about the Von Trapps and the whole Sound of Music phenomenon.
Yeah, he's great at that, yeah.
But he says, boy, you write one book about Laura Ingalls, and that's it. They're after you from then on. So he wound up writing a lot about it. And I wound up learning so much about that era and about Laura and about Nellie, and it's absolutely fascinating now. And I mean, I wish I'd know more, I was doing the show, but now the stuff I'm learning, I'm like, this is great. So now it's become, I'm a total like prairie hobby person. I'm not only on like, the Little House fan pages on Facebook fans, I'm on the like Little House real Laura Ingalls page where they talk about history. I'm like, I've become a prairie history nerd now late in life. It's weird.
I don't blame you. I love it. I also love the Southwest, like Tucson and out to El Paso, that whole area, it's all just so fascinating.
And that's places where we filmed. We filmed in old Tucson, and we filmed up in Sonora. So then that gets all crazy. And I did a movie called I Married Wyatt Earp with Marie Osmond in 1981. And out in old Tucson and everything, where Marie plays Mrs. Earp. Marie Earp. She marries Wyatt Earp. It was all very strange. And I play her goofy friend, Amy. But we were in the actual place in Arizona, and it's just blah, blah. So, all this weird history TV combo stuff.
What did you find out about Nellie that you didn't know? Because obviously the character had a function in the show, but she's a real person in real life, and there's quite a bit known about her.
Some of the meanness thing may have been true. Laura may have exaggerated for poetic license and dramatic effect, but there was sort of a debate in Walnut Grove. It was kind of like that whole Richard III thing. Like, was he evil? Was he not? There were people who were saying, they had letters from people, and some people had said who had known Nellie and known Laura, saying, nah, Laura was laying it on a little thick. She was kind of bratty herself and was kind of blaming Nellie for stuff because it made a better story. And then there was someone who'd written a letter saying, no, I knew these people. And yes, Nellie was absolutely impossible. She was awful. So it was sort of like, is she or isn't she? Then I met this guy who, great-grandson, but direct relation of the real Nellie. She was Nellie. She married a guy named Henry Curry, something about a steamboat captain. She had 3 kids. In real life, she married this guy. She got divorced, which is scandalous, and we don't know. I haven't got why yet. But she had 3 kids, and there's a whole other life that this person had. The great-grandson had a relative who'd known Nellie, and when they were watching the show, they had the elderly aunt who had known Nellie watch it and said, what do you think? And she said, very accurate. So May have been something there in her personality. But then you have this Stella girl and this Genevieve girl, and that's all sort of in the South Dakota era with it she kind of combined. And there's some talk that, oh, Genevieve was great, she made it up, and others going, yeah, Genevieve was pretty darn stuck up and tried to steal El Manzo and was kind of like the, cliquey girl at school and was kind of awful. And so, yeah, so there's it's mixed. People are saying, yes, these girls were kind of terrible to Laura, and she was right. And other people saying, nah, Laura was just laying it on thick to make herself look good. So there's a whole debate there about how terrible these girls were or not.
Yeah, and girls sometimes are terrible, especially when you're not exposed to anything else but each other.
Teenage girls, and there's nothing to do out there in the middle of nowhere in South Dakota. So what are the odds that when you look at teenage girls who have plenty to do and how backstabby they can be with the other guy, what must they have been like then? So yeah.
When you look at your career, you have this thing where, let me ask you this: is it even possible to have a show like Happy Days or Leave It to Beaver or Little House on the Prairie where just everybody knows the characters so well? Like it just, we're too, I think, fractured with our entertainment to really do that anymore. I mean, can someone be like you, where like you're just, no matter where you go, they know who you are in some fashion, right? Even if it's not the real you,
right.
It's not, they don't know Alison, they know Nellie or whatever.
That's a tough one because, I mean, yeah, people said, like, well, can we have shows where people really, we can have good shows. I mean, everyone's talking about how, like, Ted Lasso is like a nice, happy show and people relate to the characters. But that's the thing, the fracture. There's so many venues to watch TV on. You have TV, you have network, you have cable, you have streaming, you have services that you pay for. We say we're on our 6th generation of viewers of Little House. And people say, well, I watched it growing up on TV. I watched it in reruns. Some say, well, I'm the VHS generation. I'm the DVD generation. And I'll have an older woman say, my child doesn't watch it. And the kid's like, I watch it on my phone on YouTube. So there's all these different venues. And because of that, we do now have shows. There are people who will say, well, you don't have as many of the, I don't believe in cable anymore. That's considered kind of nutty, like not having electricity at this point. But you do have people go, it's too many streaming services. Yeah, I got cable and I got like one of them. I got like Netflix, but no, I can't get Hulu and Apple and Paramount keep track of all of these shows. I can't do it. I mean, I have a bunch of them because, like, the Emmys and the SAG voting, they gave me a couple of months free on some of them, and I wound up getting one. So I probably have more streaming services than a lot of my friends. And there's stuff I go, what the heck are you talking? No, I've never seen that show. And it's all I can do to watch them all. So, yeah, we do have that thing where there's whole groups of people who watch this and watch this, and they're talking to each other and going, I have no idea what you're talking about. When Little House was on, we had 3 channels. We had ABC, NBC, PBS. We didn't have cable yet. We didn't have VHS yet. When they started, like, we're going to sell videotapes in the stores. No, we didn't have any of that. It was incomprehensible. It's like what happened in France. Like, why I'm going to France in the weekend. In France in the 70s, usually shows from America wouldn't come till maybe the 80s, if we were 70s. But somebody thought to run the pilot of Little House when they're out there in Kansas in France as like a Christmas special. And they went nuts. And they said, we want the series. And it was only like 76, 77.
Oh,
and we started 74 in the US. And you would think, oh, they'll start getting reruns in France in, 1980. They were like by 76, 77, they got it. So it was early. And they only had like 2 channels, 3 channels. It was like England, BBC 1, they had like France 1, France 2. And French people go home for lunch. In the 70s, they really all went home for lunch. Kids came home from school for lunch. People left work. Now they sometimes go home for lunch or they hang out in the break room with the TV on. And like we would have soap operas, they've got Little House on. Little House ran at lunchtime every day. If there's only 3 channels and like one of them's the news but one of them's Little House on the Prairie, and everyone's sitting there going, well, what do you want to watch? We're going to watch Little House on the Prairie. The entire country sat there watching Little House on the Prairie every single day for decades. So they're more obsessed in a way than the US, and there are more smaller, cohesive communities. So I show up and they're like, ah!
Right.
It's a whole other, exactly, a thing where because of the limits on what they could watch, a group of people watch something together in a way that would know it's almost physically impossible to happen now.
It's crazy how much we love Laura Ingalls Wilder. No, first off, like, she also wrote letters to her fans nonstop. She was a letter writer until the very, very end,
Right.
And then she also had this fuel of this show, but not only the show, but Michael Landon's genius that he brings in there. And it's almost made her an immortal character, I think. I mean, I think people will forget about Michael Landon before they forget about her.
She never imagined this. I mean, they say that had she lived past 57 and the concept of a show had come to her, she probably would have said no.
No.
But she died, and then Rose got it, and then Rose left everything to that guy McBride, Roger McBride, who's a very, very controversial figure, and he's a very interesting person, very controversial. But so of course he was like, "Yeah, TV show. What are you creating? Where do I sign?" And of course became very wealthy because he was like, "Duh." But Michael was very smart. So you had, Ed Friendly was shopping the books, and then Michael. But he'd just come off Bonanza. So NBC's like, well, we got to give you a show. You're Little Joe is the hot, cute guy. We're going to have a show. They're thinking sexy policeman, something is going to be, David Hasselhoff with the talking car. It's going to be, and because it's the 70s. So they're thinking more like, Charlie Sheen. They're not thinking the prairie. It was that deruralization of TV where they were canceling all the Westerns. Yeah. And he said, oh, no, I want to do Little House on the Prairie. And they're like, you're correct. No. And he said, well, then I'm not doing it. He insists. And then, and I'm playing Charles Ingalls, but I'm not growing a beard. And like, no, it's all right. But of course, he was right. And so he constantly fought them every step of the way. He was always hiring people and then having to be told, they're supposed to go to network for approval. Oh, oops, I forgot that part. Yeah. He would just do stuff, and he would write things and direct things and do things. And everyone has endless audition stories of how, I didn't read for network, or people who were supposed to read for network. And he said, no, I changed my mind. I'm not having it. He just did it. And he was right. He kept not doing what he was told by the system, and he was right. And hence we have Little House on the Prairie. And people argued about it and said, oh, he's out of his mind. And I was like, I think he's onto something. And here we all are. So he got it. He knew all these women who were in love with Little Joe had grown up reading the books. So he's like, hello, ding, ding. And
all he did was just do hits in Hollywood. Basically until the very end, he was just always on a successful TV show.
He would have had a fourth hit. He was working on a show called Us when he died of pancreatic cancer. He was working on Us, and it would have been another hit. I don't know what it is. He tapped into something. He went, I get it. This is what people want. They want this. And then he just did that.
Yeah. And he would do it over and over again. He's like, now we're going to show the hands.
Over and over again. Well, he did crazy things. Highway to Heaven, when he first did that, I thought he'd lost his mind. I'm like, he's going to play an angel. Oh, yes. And Victor French, who's Mr. Edwards, going to be a sidekick. And he's like, what in the world? Yeah. Hit, smash. He knew what he's doing. He saw something. And sometimes as, an artist, a performer, you say, well, I want to do this. Other people don't want this, but this is what I think I should be doing. Somehow he said, nope, this is what people want. He tapped into something and went, I am going to do that. And he bloody well did it. And he did it over and over again. It's genius.
Yeah. Let's talk about your career a little bit, because you have this early hit. You're young, super successful. You get the Wyatt Earp movie, and then things kind of change for you. And then you come back to it. So talk about that evolution.
Well, it's so crazy because, yes, you do this show and everybody says, I want to be on a hit show. And everybody says, I want to have an iconic character and have everybody love me, know who I am. Yeah, but then you do, and people think you're that person, and it's like for life, and it's like, Mork. No. It's just you're stuck with this thing, and it doesn't go away. And what do you do? And they buried Bela Lugosi in the Cape. So, and then you're like, eek. And my agent told me one, and this was it was in my 20s, that he said that I pitched me for something. He said, you're perfect. And they said, this takes place in modern day. And he said, she's not Pioneer Barbie. She doesn't come with the dress. So there was this weird, that's why he wound up doing the Wyatt Earp movie. They're like, oh yeah, sure. My agent was like, well, that they would take you for because it's 1800s. There was this weird typecasting. People are still afraid of me. My friends, my husbands, ew, you know her. Well, why do you hang out with her? Is she like? So that's insane. So there is typecasting. I like playing villains, so that's fine by me. But it was so weird. And so there was this whole period right after the show where it was very, very difficult. And I was like, I'm not going to talk about that. Ha, ha, ha. And then, of course, it wound up on DVD and everything else. And it became bigger than it was when we were on it. And so then it's like, can't beat them, join them. What am I doing? Let's tap into this madness. And ever since I said, fine, I'm just going to get on this train, then I got work and things have gone well. And of course, I have been able to work with the stand-up. When I tried to do stand-up and not talk about the prairie, just
can't do it.
When I said, all right, fine. You want to talk about the prairie? We'll talk about them. And then, of course, it was hilarious and it totally worked. And that's why the book, I went, okay, this is my real life and this is the prairie and here's what happened, and just talked about everything. People loved it. It was a smash. So when I just said, here's what is actually happening, here's who I really am, but here's what's happening, and blah, I was fine. So that's why I don't have a problem. I don't like fighting it. The amount of energy involved in saying, let's not talk about the prairie. My God, I could have built the pyramids. So, it's like, give it up. Hence why I've been reading Little House books on the thing, which is the greatest thing ever. If anything, it's increased my visibility. People love it. It's made people happy. And as I said, this movie, playing a villain, love it. Evil music manager, lovely young girl trying to stick to her values in the music industry, and I try to ruin everything. I'm just awful, and I'm totally good with that. It was a fun part. Doing things that relate to the prairie. I love cooking. I've always known how to cook. Nellie couldn't cook. How perfect. A cookbook for people who can't cook. Cooking videos. And what do we call it? Who's going to do the cooking? The line from the show, because guess.
I love it. I was going to use Mariska Haggerty as my example of someone who gets typecast, and she's just like, you know what? Why stop?
Right.
Why change?
Are they paying?
Yeah, are they paying? Okay, great.
Is the check clear? So it's very, very difficult, because obviously, if you're in show business, you have some sort of ego. You wouldn't be in entertainment if you didn't have some kind of ego and want things to be about you. As I always said, people go into television hoping they want to be loved, and I got a job where everyone hated me. So that was weird. But you wouldn't do it if you didn't have an ego. So part of you goes, well, I want to tell my story. I want my art. If you're talking about TV shows, but that kind of thing, people think that, and that is a thought you're going to have if you're an actor. But then there's also, reality. What are people?
Right.
I mean, I can talk about all the brilliant things I've did, but we say all roads lead to Walnut Grove.
Yes.
Or as my husband says, never underestimate the power of the prairie. People are, yes, they want me in things. Why do they want me in them? Because I'm famous, because I was on Little House on the Prairie. I wrote a book. Now, the book wasn't just about the prairie. The book's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
But people bought it because they went, that's the kickoff. And that's how it's going to be. And everyone from the show has had to sort of deal with, yes, I have done all these things on my own, but the only reason anyone was speaking to me in the first place was because of that silly show.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of akin to, the Playmate status. It was like a promotional thing where you can always put that on your thing, and it gave you some credibility to get more work. How was the timing? I know, like, the Brady's, by the way, did an episode in Grand Canyon with some Indians. They kind of just smash it in there, right? Because it was part of the narrative in the 70s. But like the Brady Bunch, the Partridge Family, Little House, these are all shows that sort of predate the really fantastic residual deals that come along. So
the Screen Actors Guild in perpetuity clause for residuals that deal was signed in 1974, right about the time we started. I think there's actually like one episode that I didn't like hit the in perpetuity clause. In perpetuity clause, prior to the in perpetuity, first there was no residuals, which is horrifying, except for the people in the Honeymooners. For some bizarre reason, they decided to do a contract where they paid them royalties and they all got money. Then nobody had anything. Then they did 6, was the magic number. They would show an episode 6 times. They would pay you residuals for those 6 showings. Come the 7th showing, they owed you nothing. So all these old shows you talk about would show over and over again, and everybody got checks for 6 times, and they're cut off. Now, there's been backtracking where the union did go into negotiations and said, something. You can't just did that. So they started to get something in the foreign sales and like DVD, but it's not very. I make a joke in my act where I say, please buy the DVDs. I get money from those. It's every 100,000 I get $1 because it's practically that. It's not very much. So people made deals so that at least the people from these older shows got something. But if you were post 74, that means every time they showed it, they cut a check. Yeah. Now, obviously so way past 6, the first few showings, like the first 2-3 years easily of residuals were amazing. It was like being on a national commercial or something. And so we were like still doing the show and getting residuals. I was like, and then it was really good. But each time they show it, it goes down. So I still get paid when they show it.
Yeah.
Because they've showed it 8 million times. So if it's an episode to 8 million times, like, when this episode is worth 29 cents. Oh, this episode is still worth $20.42. So, and they'll wait till it's like a check once a year now. They bundle it. And there's been foreign sales and there's been the DVD money. But I'm 59 years old, and there's still some money does come from the show, which is at least the principal thing. I can say during my 20s, it was rather proper. It was proper money. We were not highly paid on Little House. We weren't horribly paid. But compared to not just like shows now where it's like, or like, as I always say, it wasn't Friends money.
Right.
It wasn't, even then, I would hear about the kind of numbers people were getting on sitcoms. Well, because there were 3-camera sitcoms. How much did that cost to make? Little House were schlepping out to location and shooting this thing like it was Gone with the Wind.
Right.
So people would make these insane amount of monies on shows that were on in the 70s and literally making 5 and 10 times what we were making on Little House. So no, we were not paid that kind of money.
Right.
But we were paid residuals, and we did get in perpetuity, which is awesome. But no, you can't live off that.
Yeah. Well, and that's sort of like the other question is how survivable is that money? The other thing, we had Lorenzo Lamas on the show, and it was really interesting. He talked about, he's like, well, first off, he's like, it used to be you got a bunch of checks, and you're just like, stop sending me checks.
Piles of them, yes.
Yeah. And then the other thing, he's like, so I had Renegade, and he's like, I tried to work a deal out to my benefit, but I didn't quite have enough bargaining power. And then they kept working the show over and over and over and over again until basically no one anywhere wanted to buy it anymore. And so they just completely wore it out, and they had no sense of how to, make it last longer. Like they would sell the rights and someone else be like, great. And then they would go out and work the hell out of it. And so he was pretty upset about that because he's like, there was a lot of money to be made in the show for everybody. But
exactly.
Yeah. And I had no idea about all these things and how the rights are managed and how that can impact the checks that show up in your
and
mailbox.
When you look at Little House on the Prairie, so you have the estate of Laura Ingalls Wilder, you have HarperCollins Publishing, and then you have the estate of Michael Landon, but then you also have the estate of Ed Friendly and his son Trip Friendly and their whole company, and they own all. And there was a division when in the middle of the show when Michael and Friendly, the producer, split. So you get Laura's life up to this, and you get Laura's life. What in the and so it got really complicated. So and then you have a cast of thousands. So figuring out how to cut those checks. No, I remember I talking to people at SAG and stuff, and even NBC when we had trouble receiving residuals. They said you have figured out like how complicated it is to cut these checks, right? I'm like,
that was the thing I was going to ask. It's like, how many people does it take to account for this, especially as it moves ownership to ownership,
right. and market? And then what market was it shown in? And are we talking the DVDs or the cable? And was it basic cable? And I'm like, yeah, I'm really glad I don't have to do that, but send my check anyway, okay? But we did. I mean, as my husband says, nobody's paying me for that paper route I had when I was 9. So it's, yes, I'm pleased to say we did get the in perpetuity. We did all receive appropriate residuals. It does get smaller every year. So now it's like, it's so tiny. But for several years, I was properly compensated, I can say.
But I bet those kids in the Mod Squad aren't getting pretty sweet residuals.
No. And the poor Waltons, the Waltons signed prior to perpetuity.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. How lucky were you? You had the great
timing. No, we're very, very lucky. And the fact that it's something, there's also shows that people were post perpetuity clause, but they don't really rerun that much. And they didn't go to DVD. They didn't go to anything. It's just not a rerun, where we were clearly a massive rerun type show, which is incredible. I know lots of people on shows that were past the perpetuity clause. They just didn't rerun that much. So what are you going to do? So we did. We were very, very lucky. And then we were on a show that kind of weirdly holds up, that people are still watching this thing. Is so crazy.
Yeah, it says. We talked a lot about Little House. We talked a little bit about the movie. What else do you want to talk about before we wrap this up here?
So I just did my shows in New York, which is crazy because, like I said, pandemic, doing all the shows in the living room. Finally starting to do a little bit live in person, bit by bit. I'm so vaccinated. I have antibodies pouring out of my ears. I have enough antibodies for everyone in the room now. I have so many shots. I'm doing a thing at UCLA. They're drawing my blood to track the thing, and that did whole bit. So I went to New York where they had a thing. I did one little thing in Missouri and one little thing here. And then I went to New York because Caveat, Marvelous Club in New York, and the Rochester Fringe Festival, super strict about you must be vaccinated, you must wear a mask, you must do all of the things, cavity search at the door. So that was good, and they spaced the audience out. So I felt, okay, we're going to work our way back to doing stuff with people in a safe COVID protocol fashion, and we did. It's how we were able to do the movie, and I was now able to do these shows in New York. So that was fun. I said, I'm not talking to the back of my computer. You're all really here. And now I'm going to go to France, and we're going to do the same thing, put on a hazmat suit, whatever bathe everyone in alcohol. But we're going to try to, in a COVID protocol way, get shows live where we speak to each other in person. And I'm going to take a shot at doing that in France for about a month. And then I don't know. Oh, well, je fais le spectacle en français maintenant. C'est très, très, très difficile pour un Américain apprendre une autre langue.
Yeah, that's not too bad. I can tell you how to take a shower. Tournez la robinet à chaud et hot.
And it's difficult because the one that says C is not called. Gotta be careful.
It's show.
Yeah, I went back to school. I went to France, found out they went crazy for me, did some French appearances, did a movie in France, and I just went back to school and hit the books, and it was really hard. And I do a show in French now, and it's completely bonkers. But I do it with this guy, Patrick, and we do a whole review, and there's audience participation. It's all very weird. But yeah, I do the thing in French. And my thing is about like communicating and talking with people. And that's why I wound up doing all the stuff in my living room and doing the readings, because I have fans that I enjoy talking to people, and they apparently enjoy having me talk to them. So that's why it was so difficult with the pandemic, because my whole career at this point is going out and talking to people in some fashion, either speaking about Protect, the child abuse charity that I'm on the board of, or talking about comedy, or telling jokes, or talking about Little House. That's what I do. And I did it online, and now I'm doing it in person, mix and match. And then I'm going to do some more. And then winter's going to hit, and I'm going to do a bunch more online. We'll be doing more online shows.
Yeah. Well, you are adaptable as hell. You just change and just get it done.
You do what you got. Yes, you do what you got to do. I mean, the things we adapted to this last, my husband kept his job, but it's like, my living room is a fright. I mean, because this part looks good, because it's like a TV studio, got lights and backdrops.
I got shit everywhere.
That's what we do. Okay, I guess we're doing this now. Okay.
Yeah. I packed up my bag and I went and I did Steve at his church, and and it's a portable show, but we can do this now. I mean, it's a 2-camera shoot. It's not that big of a deal, but it's also one guy doing the assistant production, and that guy looks like me. The technical director looks like me.
I'm doing my show in a studio in Toluca Lake, a lovely studio, and then it's like, not doing that now. Next thing I'm Zooming. So now they've reopened the studio and said we can do it. We got the air filters and the thing, and you can come. So it's like, okay, but a lot of the people coming on my show, they went, well, I'm not in LA right now, so it's actually better for me that you're Zooming it, or they're elderly and immune compromised and going, actually, I'd rather do your show by Zoom. I'm like, Zoom it is. So, I didn't know how to Zoom. I had never done a Facebook Live. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff before the pandemic hit. And now I'm like, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop. Yeah.
No big deal. Yeah.
Do what you do.
Well, listen, I appreciate you. We had you on for an hour, and I had a blast talking to you about
thank
everything. You. And I just think the world of you and what you're doing. And I know, like, certain people get an instant reaction when I have them on the show. And I have all kinds of people on the show. Earlier today, we talked about Afghanistan with a friend of mine. We're both very knowledgeable about that. But when I posted that I was having you on the show, people started going crazy. They started saying, hey, wait, hold on. I love this. I'm going to watch. And so whatever it is that you're doing it great.
I'm still not quite clear on what it is I'm doing, but I'm going to keep doing it.
Good. I appreciate it. All right, stand by while I shut this thing down for 1 second. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching the Break It Down Show.